Hello, friends and enemies, heroes and villains. Welcome to Epic Realms. Today's guest is an author of paranormal and urban fantasy fiction. Her works span multiple different series. So please welcome the very talented, the wildly talented Deborah Wilde. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Very nicely done, Nick.
I was wondering if you cringe or if you'd laugh or what would happen if I said
No,
that.
fantastic. Hello, everybody.
So I'm always curious when I have a guest on, uh, kind of what their path is, how they got there, and usually that starts in their youth. Were you a writer? Did you like writing when you were a youngster, or was that
Yeah,
something that came later in life?
I loved writing. I didn't think that was a career path unless you were a white man in New York. To me, I was like, no, that's not a thing people do. But then I got into screenwriting. I did my master's in I did my master's in film theory on gender and spectatorship in the animation of Chuck Jones, which means I did Bugs Bunny through the lens of feminist film theory. So if anyone, your parents ever give you crap about your useless degree, point them to me. You're welcome. Um, but then from there, I actually started screenwriting instead of staying in academia. And I did that for 12 years. And then the Canadian film industry kind of got to a very depressing point, and I was really discouraged. And I was like, well, I don't know if I want to even write anymore. So I decided I would just go write what I wanted to write. And that's how I ended up starting a YA pen name. And I did that for a few years. And then I thought, nope, I want to write adult urban fantasy and have magic adventures with spicy romance. And so Deborah Wilde, these books were born.
Nice. Well, let's get into some
Mhm.
of these details of that. So, did you have inspirations as a youth when you were writing, or did you do a lot of reading as well? And how were
Yes.
grades? How were school grades? Were those like you're like, oh,
Oh,
I'm doing awesome, or is it like, yeah, this could use some work?
no, I was that like alpha female kid who loved school, who, put me in a library. I still know my library card number by heart. I was that kid. I did write a lot. I had a lot of my influences, I think my influences actually thinking about it, my influences were very strange. So it was everything from like Neil Simon comedies and Billy Wilder and old screwball Hollywood. Like my mom would take me to the local repertory theater, and like we'd all go, with my grandparents, and we'd all go watch these old movies that were fantastic. Um, and then also I did read a lot, and I loved a lot of fantasy, like a lot of British stuff too, like Four Children in It and Narnia, and all of that, of course. But then when I was 8, I saw this book on a carousel in the library, and it said, "Don't panic." And I was like, "What is this?" And I went and I picked it up, and it was Hitchhikers, and it blew my mind, and I think set my journey for the rest of my life. I was like, "Oh, fantasy can be funny. This is incredible." And it just, yeah.
Yeah, and you can
So that
definitely
was a
see that. You
huge.
can definitely see that in a lot of your works, and a lot of people talk about that. Um, when you were bridging that gap, and you're like starting to grow up, and you're like, I'm gonna go to school for film. What led to that decision as opposed to some other thing? Why did you not start writing books right away? Was it because you didn't think you could, like you had
Yeah,
mentioned,
it
or
was because I just honestly didn't think it was a career path I could do. And the film thing was actually really funny. So again, speaking of school, I did the International Baccalaureate program in high school, which is like this academic program. And when I was going to university, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to take. I was thinking maybe political science or so, I had no idea. Um, but we were flipping through the catalog. My mom was flying out to Montreal from Vancouver with me, and she said, "Oh, look, film. You like film. You should, what about that?" And I went, "Okay." She claims later, she said, "I meant it as an elective." but but that ended up becoming my degree. So I did my undergraduate. It was an English degree with a specialization in film communications, and then I went on to do a master's in film theory.
okay? Did
Yeah.
you, when you were started to do that as a career, were there like certain types of scripts like I'm gonna do this, or was it like whatever work I could get my hands on?
I think it was twofold. So I was really heavy in the indie community. So for the indie stuff, I was doing like my own, weird little shorts and like a screwball comedy feature. And but for in terms of my agented television paid work, it was whatever jobs they could put me up for. And it was amazing. Like I actually did get to do fantasy live action and animation. I got to do comedy animation. I got to do some half-hour comedy series. So it was all over the place. And I feel really blessed to have had that experience and really lucky to have had that training of being in a writer's room and seeing how things get made and how not to be too precious and how to look at obstacles as creative opportunities. And I think all of that served me well when I transitioned into becoming an indie author.
Yeah, for sure. Was there a different format that you'd have to do? So, say you're doing an animation comedy, and then later you do like something more serious. Did you have to change your format or how you did it, or when it comes to writing the script, do you have to be cognizant of the pacing of those things?
Oh, for sure, for sure. And also the literal structure of it, right? So, depending on, it might have been an animation might have been a 3-act structure, and whereas, with a 1-hour fantasy, then I'm dealing with a 5-act structure, which does change. One thing, though, I have to say, like, it changes the nature of where some of the bigger plot points hit, but one thing I will say is it also made me very cognizant of this was in the days of commercials, right? Where it wasn't streaming services, you
Yeah,
had your commercial and people would turn away because who wanted to watch commercials, right? So it was very much, how do you hook them that even if they turn away, they're going to come back in, a minute, 30 seconds and keep watching your show. And so that's always stayed with me in terms of how I think of my ends of chapters. To me, I think of them as commercial breaks.
yeah.
So that changed.
What
Yeah.
was kind of your process in sitting down? You sit down, you're like, okay, I've got to do this. Would you have like a storyboard in front of you, like, okay, these are the points I want to hit, or did you just like sit down and just have at it and just do it as you went?
Was this for you mean for the
For the
screenwriting
script writing, yeah,
specifically?
yeah, yeah,
It depended, like, sometimes in a writing room, you'd be given the idea. It's like, you'd break story together and then everyone gets assigned an idea and here are your 2 scripts. And so, you go away and you come up with the outline and then, you get your notes and then you go to draft. I had one show, one of the last shows I did, which was an animated fantasy series that involved it was half animation in an alternate world and half live action. I was the executive story editor, and it was essentially the showrunner and me. That was the entire department. And so we had some freelancers we used, but we broke the entire season and all the arcs. And she had like 200 Smurfs, and we used all the Smurfs to plot out. Like, so we assigned all the characters to Smurfs and used them to plot out battles and for the animation and stuff. But then what would happen is we would write it was a springboard, a one-page synopsis, and deliver it to the freelancer, and they would then turn in an outline, and theoretically, they were also then supposed to turn in a first draft and then a second draft, but because of time constraints, we ended up just taking the first draft and rewriting it. Like, they got the credit as they
yeah.
should because they were contracted for that, but just for time purposes, we had to rewrite it, and we also understood, there were financial constraints. There was, whatever had come up on set. We lost a location, we lost an actor, this had to change. So it was just easier to take it in house and deal with it.
So you mentioned you kind of then shifted because things were kind of started to dry up, and then you're like, well, I'm going to try my hand. What made you decide, okay, how about books, writing a novel? How is that as opposed to a different kind of career? What was it that said, I'm going to take this other big risk as opposed to something that, might be adjacently related?
So, okay, here's my confession. I tried so hard to find a different career. I
Okay.
did this 3-week intensive career retraining thing, and they did all this testing, and we were there every day for 3 weeks. And at the end, they're like, yeah, you should be a writer. And I was like, no, I tried so hard. I go out and they keep pulling me back in. So at that point, I was like, okay, if I am going to write, like, do I even like it anymore at this point? And so
Yeah.
initially, the first book I wrote, the YA book, it was purely for me. Like, I didn't even think I was going to self-publish at that point. This was in 2012.
Okay.
And but then self-publishing had come up and it's like, well, wait a minute, I'm actually having a lot of fun doing this because it's me and I don't have to worry about financiers and producers and this is going to make or break on the strength of what I do. And so and also I love learning stuff. So I started educating myself about self publishing. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do 5 books in 3 years and see what happens.
Yeah.
And I did that. I didn't do it the books did well. I was terrible at marketing. I did no marketing. So, luckily I was still teaching screenwriting at the time. So that was good. But then at the end of that, I'm like, okay, this was really awesome. And I feel like I learned a lot, but I don't want to be writing YA anymore.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
What was the transition like when you're going from screenwriting to writing the book? You got to do things. Pick. This is the author name I'm going to go under. This is the theme I want to do. The target audience, your subjects, your theme. How did you sit down and come to the conclusion of, okay, this is what it's going to be? I know you said that you did it for yourself, but what about that was for yourself?
Well, at the time I was just loving reading YA. So for me, it was like, I want to write some YA just because I'm having so much fun with it.
Okay.
And I don't even know where the pen name was Tallulah Darling. And for the life of me, I can't remember where that came from. I think it was just some joke about an alter ego. And then I was like, that just sounds fun. Let's write that. And so the first book was a straight rom-com. And then my next big seller was I did a trilogy that was a YA rom-com retelling of the Persephone myth.
Okay.
My Ex from Hell, My Date from Hell, My Life from Hell. So you can see now the magic and the voiciness, like this is where it all just sort of started
Yeah.
there, and bringing together all my love of old Hollywood banter and magic and fantasy and adventures and stuff like that, magic adventures. So yeah, and then for Deborah Wilde, well, Deborah is my real name. And then I just wanted a last name that would sound good for urban fantasy. And yeah, but I knew I wanted those same, like I wanted magic and I wanted adventure and I wanted to be able to bring in, certain aspects of mystery and procedurals and yeah, so all of that just sort of is where it started.
Did you, when you shifted from Tallulah over, was there a reason that you like, I'm going to shift? Was it just because you wanted to do something different? Did you feel like it was something different? Did somebody suggest, hey, try a name change, or you're going from young adult to adult, maybe you should change it? Because I hear a lot that is what happens. People are like, oh, well, I changed it because I changed from young adult to adult, or from adult to horror, or whatever the reason they're changing. That's why they have separate names.
I think part of it was I wanted a clean slate for
Mm-hmm.
this new direction, and the other reason was I really wanted to include spicy romance,
Yeah.
and I did not want to confuse readers, or especially any younger readers that I
Right.
would have had. Although, to be honest, most of my readers were adult women, even for the YA. But there were some, and because like my Persephone story was suitable for tweens. I didn't want that audience suddenly picking up this new book going, "Oh, it's the same writer. That's okay." It's like, "No, please
Yeah.
don't do that."
Yeah. That makes sense. Did you feel yourself as a writer change at the same time as well, like not just what the content was but how you went about it?
I think I ended up putting a lot more of myself into it because I was now writing adults. So, and I think because I've written heroines of different ages, I've been able to channel different life experiences of myself that perhaps were not present or I didn't know how to put into the YA books.
Do you feel that from going back to you did script writing, and now you're writing, right? You're
Yeah.
creating characters, you're creating stories, multiple series, where stuff's going to be happening and laid out. Do you find that a lot of your time at that script writing, you kind of mentioned it earlier, helped with that, and in what way?
Oh, for sure. First and foremost, I'd say structure, theme. I love to dig into characters. I love to understand thematically what my series are about. Banter has always been my happy place and an easy place for me. But definitely structure and theme. I've had the same editor on, I guess we're going into our 23rd book now. And structure's never really been an issue with when she edits me, just because I had such a good grounding in it from my
Yeah.
screenwriting time. I will say the thing that did not translate and that I still work very hard on is when you write a script, you don't write the environment and you don't write what the actors are doing. You're specifically told, don't do that because they'll just cross that out. They don't want to be told. That's their thing to figure out.
Yeah.
So for me, my first few books, there were a lot of, are your characters sitting on their hands in a vacuum? from my editor, and I'm like, yeah, they are. They're all just sitting on their hands in a vacuum, and that's how this conversation is proceeding. Thank you. So learning to use my environment. That was a huge one for me.
How did you eventually start to overcome that? Just doing
I
it?
doing it, reading people who do it very well, watching movies. How are people interacting with their environments visually? Like, the more I work well when I have a lot of input that I can then process and figure out, oh, this work, I understand. Like, oh, in this scene they did this and they were mixing that cake batter. And okay, I've also done, I will admit to having done Google searches as things you find in a kitchen
Yeah, yeah.
or things you find in a living room. What am I interacting with? So I'm still constantly working on that aspect of my craft.
One of my favorite phrases is Google is your friend. Anytime anybody asks me something, if they ask me something and I don't know the answer, I go, I don't know, but Google is your friend every time.
Yeah. Yeah. I just shudder to think what kind of, like, no fly. I figure they must know, I'm an author, I hope, because I'm not on a no fly list. But yeah, some of the things I just wonder, I go, what is this flagging?
uh, so you mentioned your editor and getting an editor that helped you out. What was the process for you? Was it somebody you knew from your time in script writing? Did you do an audition
No.
process, or how did you get an author and now you have them for this long? That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, what happened was I had actually reached out to a different freelance editor, and she wasn't taking clients on, but she had a co-partner in a company at a time, and my editor was her co-partner. And so she'd sent me a couple articles on editing that Alex had written, and then she facilitated an email introduction, and we just hit it off. And, like, they just get me like nobody else. It's amazing. They have pushed me on every book in my craft. They push me to be funnier. Yeah, I cannot say enough amazing things. Like, a good editor is just worth their weight in gold.
And that goes out to anybody listening. The
Yes.
ongoing theme here with every author we have ever talked to is get a good editor.
Yeah.
Period. End of subject.
Yeah.
Don't skimp.
Yeah.
If you can skip on
No.
anything, let that not be it.
Oh yeah, no, never skip on that. Because I mean, it's a collaboration, right? And they will see the things I can't because I've read it 50 times. And even, beta readers, arc readers, they're wonderful, but having one person who is that consistent editorial eye to take you through all your books and series is a really wonderful thing. And I mean, she has a full-time job in real life where she does other things, and like, she was getting her math doctorate well for many books that we were doing together. And so I worry, I'm like, oh, one day she's not going to want to do this anymore. No, I don't know. I hope maybe I'll just try to drive a money truck up to her house or something and just go, Alex, please stay with me.
Well, and I love the fact that so often people are also a little separate from their editor. Sometimes they like, I know who my editor is, but we don't really meet. They send me information, I do my job. So it's really nice and cool to hear every time there's an author that like just gets along with their editor, and they're, friends and in almost, siblings in some aspects of it, where they like super care about each other and they just know each other. And so that's really cool to hear that
it,
from you.
what's funny is we've never met. She lives in the States, I'm in Canada. We've never met. We've never done the Zoom call, but like, she knows my most intimate writing process. I know she's off traveling and where like, we were talking about recommendations. She's traveling in Japan right now. So I was like, we're chatting, like, we chat about stuff. But yeah, it's so weird. We've never met. I really look forward to the day I can sit down and have like a good meal and a nice drink with her.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That'll be super cool.
Yeah.
And then you're gonna have to put her in a book and write a whole story about
That's right.
it. um, so tell us a little bit briefly about
Yeah.
the Unlikable Demon Hunter and that whole series. We're getting into that
Yes.
that part of
So
your
where
career
it all started.
where it all started. How did you get to
It
that? Where was the idea? Was there an inspiration for it?
Oh
Give us
yeah.
all the things.
There was the inspiration was I was really pissed off at reading all these articles about how female characters had to be likable, because I was watching things like The Sopranos or Dexter, or it's like, okay, so we can have these complicated, nuanced, possibly monstrous male characters, and that's a go, but female characters have to be likable. And it was the it was mostly in reaction to that. Like I think the title came first. Because I was thinking, well, okay, now I'm moving into urban fantasy. This is what I want to write. I want to write about some demon hunting, and this is where it comes from. And then the next piece of the puzzle was I just had this idea about this young woman who is kind of a hot mess for very specific reasons. But the one thing she loves is her twin brother more than anything. He's been training his entire life to join this secret society, and she goes to his induction ritual of this all-male brotherhood, and whoops, they find out they've been training the wrong twin. And I thought, okay, that's fun. So, between unlikable and whoops, wrong twin with an all-male brotherhood, it also allowed me to so when I started the Deborah Wilde, I didn't realize, or I didn't consciously think about at the time, that I was going to end up including my Judaism and Jewish mythology and Jewish world building in all my series. But I did know I wanted to do it for the Unlikable Demon Hunter. And so it was also my way of working through some of the patriarchal issues I have with my own religion, with this all male brotherhood. So yeah, that came out too.
I love that. And that kind of plays into some of your other books as well, right?
All of them, every single one of my books. So every single one of my series is set in a predominantly, sometimes they go off, but predominantly in a version of Vancouver, although there's no connections between the series.
Okay.
And each of them has a Jewish female main character, a Jewish love interest, and also the world building and the magic systems are drawn from some aspect of Judaism or Jewish mythology. Or I wanted to part of what was important to me with the first series and continues to be important to me is, like, I read everything as a kid, and I wasn't in those pages unless it was a Holocaust story. And yes, absolutely, very important stories to tell. But you know what? I wanted the Jewish girl going through the wardrobe, or going down the rabbit hole into Wonderland. So I wanted to write those stories and show different kinds. I don't know. I'm not, to be honest, I don't even know if it was me consciously wanting to show different kinds of representation, although that was part of it. Like I wanted to show surprising places you find Jews as opposed to the traditional Ashkenazi kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, but I just wanted to see myself, mostly that was it. And also I have to feel like I have something to say. And, so many authors have done like Celtic mythology brilliantly,
Right.
or Greek and Roman mythology. And I love those authors, but I'm not the person to contribute to that.
Right.
So I felt like, okay, I have something to say, and I think I can do something new and original. It's why I didn't even include vampires until my third series, because until that point, I didn't feel like I had anything original to contribute to the conversation, and others had done it so much better.
Yeah. That makes sense. Do you have a lot of people coming up to you and I'm like, thank you so much for this,
Oh God, yeah.
portraying us this way and
Yeah.
doing that? Because I see that a lot in underrepresented people and genres not being represented, and people going, I can't believe I can read it and like, this is me in this book. This is my character, or that character, I totally feels like how I would have felt, and I'm so glad to be represented. How does that
Yeah.
feel for you as the
Oh my
author?
God. That means the world to me. Like, I joke around that the best thing anybody can say to me is, "I made them laugh." Like, that to me, that's like my cocaine. "Oh, I made you laugh." But, when I get those emails, like, that's everything to me. And this is the coolest thing. I love this. So I ended up getting a reader who is a female rabbi who reached out to me, who loves my books, and she's like, "So if you ever want to have any conversations or you have any questions, I'm your person." So when I started writing Big Demon Energy, I'm like, "Well, let me ask you." And I started asking her. Actually, no, I think it was in Magic After Midlife. I started emailing her. Like we had a whole conversation about whether a vampire who'd been a rabbi whether it was okay if he said prayers, even though there wasn't a minion, which is the quorum of 10 men, just given the situation. Like, it was just like, can I get away with this? Because now he's a vampire. He's not actually a rabbi anymore, but he was. So this is still important to him. And like, we'd had these conversations over Messenger.
Yeah.
She's like, oh, this is so much more interesting than my, the sermon I'm supposed to be writing, right? Oh, but I love this. It's like I can have this conversation. And then she was wonderful when I started creating the Bedeviled AF series, in giving me some ideas. Like, she actually named my magic system for me because my Hebrew is non-existent. So
Yeah.
yeah, I was very lucky. But yeah, I love that. But I also love, I have to say equally, I love when people are like, I'm so used to reading, say, the Celtic or the Greek and Roman mythology.
Right.
And to me, this was fascinating. Like, I love this. And now I'm going to buy your next series. It's equally as important to me to be entertaining, people who maybe haven't had any touchstones with my
Right.
culture and my religion. And I mean, I'm a very secular Jew, and all my characters are very secular Jew. I mean, bacon figures predominantly in many of my books. But it's important to me that people, they're just connecting with it, because hopefully what I'm writing is universal. It's like through a specific lens, but still what I'm touching on is universal.
And also, I feel educational, right?
Hmm.
You get to a lot of things. For instance, just the other day, somebody was talking. You mentioned the Celtic. They were talking about a certain Celtic mythology, and I go, "Oh, I know the name of the Tuatha De Danann and all of their things because of the Kevin Hearn books. So I
Right.
know about some of those. I know some of the actual history from that kind of stuff, but I only know that because of what I read. And so people coming
Yeah.
into your books, they're going to understand like some things that they wouldn't have known had they
Yeah.
not read your books. And that
Yeah.
is so cool. And yet, like you said, it's still like that's not the core of the story. It's an urban fantasy, demon hunter,
Yeah.
so
Exactly. Funny, sexy.
yeah,
Go.
exactly. So
Yeah.
that's just a backdrop of the character that's really
Yes.
cool. And so you can have fun with the book and still learn something. And
Yeah.
I think that is so fascinating and so amazing to
Thank
have
you.
out there in the world just because it helps everybody, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the more we can connect with all different people, the better off our world is going to be.
When you're looking at where you were in the Unlikable Demon Hunter, and even before that with your young adult, and then you're now at the Bedeviled AF series. Do you see an evolution in your writing?
Yeah, for sure.
What do
Um,
you see in that evolution?
it's funny, I did a reread of all my books in order, including the shorts, which I'd never done before. Generally, I write them and delete them from my brain. So I just wanted to see, is this all still working? I was very happy that it was. Um, I think there's a maturity, but I think that's also in that I've aged up my characters. So I mean, Nava's 20 when it starts, when Unlikable Demon Hunter starts. And that was because Nava had to undergo a lot of growth. But then Ash is in her late 20s and Miri is 42 and now Aviva's 30. But I think just generally there's a maturity not just to my characters, but there's also a maturity to how I am able, going back to environment and interaction with the world. So there's a maturity to the prose of my writing as well.
Do you feel that these books, they could read these, people could read your books and they'd go in order and they'd actually see you as a person grow as a human being, grow as not just an author, but like the person that's, going to get the groceries and, yelling at somebody who cut you off in traffic, stuff like that.
I think so, because and it's funny if you look at when they were written. So I mean, the Demon Hunter books were written so 2017 to 2020, and then Ash, Blood and Ash comes out, the Jezebel Files. Well, those just dropped in 2020, and they're very cynical. We were in lockdown.
Yeah.
Like there is that reflection. I realize now, I don't think I thought about it at the time. And then with Miri, Miri's whole thing is she's 42 and she feels invisible and she has a lot of rage. And again, I mean, those, I was able to channel certain things I was going through and I was feeling as I hit over 40, into that book as well. So yeah, there's definitely been things reflecting in my own life specifically into that. Yeah.
Yeah. Sit us down with you you're sitting down to write a book. Are you an outline person? You write up an outline, or are you a pantser where you just like go by the seat of your pants? Maybe a combination of the two, or does it change from book to book?
It changes. I used to be a very strict outliner. I mean, that was my screenwriting training. It was like there was nothing happening till that outline happened. And then it was like, well, I'll do the major beats, and to this day, I still love Blake Snyder's Save the Cat structure. Like to me, for a first draft, I love it. So I'll do some major beats. But I know where it's going. And then it was like, well, if I know the inciting incident and I can get to the, midpoint, that's good. So yeah, but then what happens with that is I know the inciting incident, I get to the midpoint, and then I'm like, "Oh shit, I have to now I have to figure out the rest of the book," or I end up rewriting the first act like 4 times.
Yeah.
But it does depend from book to book. Generally, it's the first in series that happens the most. Yeah.
Tell our audience what that means when you say the inciting incident and
Oh, sorry.
both of
The
those.
inciting incident is like the catalyst. It's the kickoff incident. So in Law and Order, it's finding the body, or a murder mystery, it's the murder, or here it's let's say in the Demon Hunter book, it might be a demon has done something, or in Big Demon Energy, Miri's well, there's 2 inciting incidents. I'm tricky that way.
Oh,
There's Miri getting her magic back. Sorry, that's throwing shade. Is there's Miri getting her magic back, and then her best friend getting kidnapped, and so it's sort of a 1-2 punch that takes Miriam on her journey. Yeah.
do you use a lot of the structures? Because I know in screenwriting they always talk about when you're writing a thing, there's the whole, this is my normal life, and then things changed. My life is no longer my day to day situation, and then like this is the thing. And I forget the term for it. Do you use that a lot in your books writing, in your stories, or is it just like maybe in the very first book of a series?
Maybe in the first book of the series, yeah, because then by that point, I say that I actually don't know how to write a book. I know how to write a very long screenplay because that's how I feel I plot them. I plot each individual book as a screenplay, and then I plot the series cinematically. Like I'm still thinking in terms of screenplay structure, like which book is my all is lost? Which book is my climax? Which book is my midpoint? What are the things I need to have happen? So I'm always plotting them constantly as screenplays.
if if one of them gets signed, they're like, we want to make a movie of this series. Are you gonna be like, well, nobody can be the screenplay writer but me? Or would you be like,
No,
would you be able to be like, no, go for it? And then
no,
would you
I
be
would
able to handle
never.
it? Would you be able to read it and go,
Yeah.
no, this is so wrong?
No, actually, so Jezebel Files was optioned, and it had crazy interest overseas. And then, unfortunately, the final piece of the puzzle was we needed Canadian financing and couldn't get it, which is so typically Canadian. It's just not even funny. But there was a showrunner, this wonderful, funny Jewish woman with a lot of TV experience who was brought on she was going to be the showrunner. She did the Bible for it. So the sort of the document of what the show would look like, some sample episodes, you know, adapting the characters for screen. And I knew I'd had conversations with the producers that, there are things that were really important to me, like obviously the Jewish representation and the magic systems, but also the LGBTQ representation is really important to me, and keeping it in Vancouver, and not just making it generic anywhere. And they agreed with that. So, I knew that the heart and spirit of my stories was intact. I had no desire to adopt my own stories. I think I'd be disastrous at it. So I was very happy, and I loved the suggestions that she made to change it for television.
Yeah.
Because again, I think because I have this screenwriting background, I'm not precious. I know things change. It's its own beast, and
Okay.
it has its own requirements for a show to have legs. So I
Yeah.
think because of that, I was able to go, okay, you got the things that matter, and the rest is do what you need to do.
Yeah. So it had the opposite effect of what most people would think. It actually, you're like, no, no, go for it. Is Vancouver still a like a theater, like a not a theater, but like a
Movie town?
movie,
Oh God,
television
yeah.
recording type city? Because I know that was really huge, especially in the '90s. Everybody was going to Vancouver to film. Vancouver to film.
Yeah.
Is it still
So
that way?
yeah, so Vancouver it's an interesting history. So that the reason that Vancouver got so many of those shows like Supernatural, like Eureka, like, X-Files was they didn't want them in LA, and Vancouver, we had an infrastructure, a film infrastructure, and we were in the same time zone as LA, and it was a fairly fast flight if somebody had to fly up or you had to fly an actor out for a different commitment or whatever. So we ended up getting all these shows people didn't want, and then suddenly we started to get this industry built around those kind of sci-fi fantasy shows.
Yeah.
And then Vancouver got a reputation for having excellent crews, which we do. And yeah, there's still, like they shut down one of the bridges to shoot Deadpool or like regularly. And I think in Vancouver, the novelty has worn off for us. Like I had to go somewhere the other day and it was like, oh, there's no parking because there's a film crew. Could just leave. Like I don't want you here anymore. Go away.
Give me my
I need to
town back.
park. Yeah, give me my town back. But yeah, for sure there still is.
Okay. Is when you talked a little bit earlier about the comedy and how that works, and you mentioned some of your inspirations. Did you watch like a lot of stand-up comedy or just straight comedy, or did you just across the board everything, whatever you could get your hands on?
No, like I said, it was mostly like I was watching like, I mean, Woody Allen, because I was watching what my parents watched, right? So
Okay.
it was like Woody Allen movies and Neil Simon comedies and Billy Wilder and like His Girl Friday, like Howard Hawks and like, all of that stuff. So that's where I was getting my comedy sensibilities through. Also sitcoms, like my family, things shut down. Like when it was time for MASH, Mary Tyler Moore, like those kinds of sitcoms, like the Norman Lear stuff, like you watch them, Carol Burnett, like these were I Love Lucy, like these were just comedy gods, and that's what my family really gravitated towards watching.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of that. I
Do you
consumed a lot of television and still do.
do you feel a lot of those shows still are viable today as far as the way the humor is presented and given? Maybe, obviously in their eras there are certain things that don't fly
For
nowadays,
sure. For
but as
sure.
far as the way they deliver lines, the way the humor goes, maybe
Oh
sometimes a little
God,
bit of the
yeah.
slapstick.
Oh my God. I think you still can't beat Lucille Ball, for line delivery, for slapstick. Laverne and Shirley, if you've ever watched the physical comedy in that show, it is outstanding,
Yeah.
or the Norman Lear social commentaries. You just there's I'm not sure we've ever managed to get back to that. Same with MASH. MASH was a comedy, but wow, the insights and the
Yeah.
the understanding of humanity and the nature of war and the nature of suffering and peace and hopefulness, yeah,
Yeah, and trying to use comedy to get past trauma.
yeah,
At least that's how I always felt MASH was that
yeah,
there was comedy, and like all of the ridiculousness that they were doing is because of all the trauma that they saw and they had to deal with on a daily basis, and that's one of the things that I always loved about MASH growing up. And,
i'm
and
i'm
here we
not
are,
sure
telling our ages.
I'm not sure if this is true, so if there's any British viewers, perhaps you can confirm this, but I was told once that in the UK MASH was not shown with a laugh track, and it was a very different experience.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if that's correct or not, but that would be a much darker experience.
Well, I know some of our audiences are from the UK, so maybe we'll hear
So
from
maybe
them and
someone
we'll
could weigh
find
in.
out. Yeah. So yeah, I could see that. I could see that being a completely different thing, because I know I've seen some things that don't have the laugh tracks, and I don't laugh. But I've seen things that have the laugh tracks, and I see it and I go, "That's not funny," and then I hear the laugh track and I find myself laughing, and I go,
Yeah.
"Why am I laughing? What? How does that work?
Yeah.
Dang it! They got me."
But in terms of stand up, I didn't used to watch stand up. I love stand up now. Like we were just actually at the Just for Laughs festival a couple of weeks ago seeing some live stand up, which was fantastic. Unfortunately, they just declared bankruptcy, which I'm just completely shocked by. But
Oh
yeah, we got
no!
to see Brett Goldstein and Tom Papa do comedy, and it was phenomenal. But so I love stand up. I don't
Just
get
just
out
for
to see it as
laughs,
much anymore, but
yeah, Just for Laughs is one of my bucket list places to go.
oh,
I used to watch
yeah.
the videos online. I grew up on stand up comedy, so when you said the
Okay.
comedy, I was like, well, let's talk about that a little bit, because I grew up on stand up comedy, especially
Like
in the
who?
'80s and whatnot. What's that?
Well, like who? Well, Delirious was, I mean, it's very problematic. Let's be, but it was huge. I mean, that was a huge stand up influence, right?
Yeah. So a lot of like, just to go to Steve Martin is,
Oh
I
yeah.
grew up
Oh
watching
my
Steve Martin.
God.
I watched him as a kid before he even did acting, when he was doing just silly, ridiculous stuff that made no sense. And as a kid, to me, what he was doing was funny, but to adults, it was also funny. Robin Williams, of course.
Oh God, yeah. Oh my
You know,
goodness.
uh, um, George Carlin, Billy
Oh,
Crystal, Red
7 words you can't
Fox.
say on
Yeah,
television.
yeah. Red Fox was amazing. I loved Red Fox. So yeah, just so many things and so much
Yeah.
stuff. Looking back as an adult now, I look back and I go, why was I as a kid laughing? Like, this is funny for adults. And I, as a kid, I didn't get the jokes, but there was something about it that I knew deep in my soul this was funny.
I actually love watching documentaries about comedians. So, like the one on George Carlin or the one,
Yeah.
I love those. And also on comedy itself. Like there's a documentary, oh, what's the joke? The Aristocrats. Do you know that? There's this old comedy and it's like a joke for comedians and they all know it. And there's a whole documentary about comedians telling this joke where they interview all these different comedians and it is
No, I don't. And now I'm going to have to
fantastic.
write that down.
Yeah,
I have to write the
The
people that are listening,
Aristocrats.
like, aristocrats.
Yeah.
So when you're putting comedy into your books, how do you know what's funny and what's not, or do you just hope? Because obviously,
Yeah.
until readers read it, you don't know if you got the punchline right. You don't know if it's the witty sarcasm that's funny, or if it's like, okay, this is coming off as like total douchebaggery type
Oh, yeah.
character.
Oh,
How do you know?
well, there's a lot of me sitting at my keyboard snickering, going, I am only entertaining myself this time. I'm positive. I have my editor as the first pass because I tend to send her emails like, it's not funny. And she's like, okay, calm down. She goes, and we can make it funny. So that's the first thing. And then my ARC readers, I've been lucky. I don't, comedy is not something I put in. It just is. It's how my family dealt with stuff. I mean, you talk about processing trauma.
Yeah,
Like I was raised with my grandparents who lost their family in World War II and they weren't in a camp, but the trauma was there.
yeah,
But comedy was how we dealt with everything. My parents divorced, it didn't matter. It was like comedy. So to me, that is just how my characters move through the world and it's their lens on life. And what I I try to always do though is I was actually just talking about this with some other writer friends today. If you read a chapter of my any of my books and you don't like it, you probably won't like any of them because they are voicey and I have a very consistent voice. But the trick is to make the flavor specific to each character, especially my main characters, because I don't want them to just sound like carbon copies of each other, which can be a danger when you're writing comedy.
yeah, for sure. Telling a story in a book is one thing, but making a character that is covers all of the things, very badass, humorous, funny, and romantic, and still being able to tell a story, that's a challenge for a lot of writers, but somehow you seem to just do it. Um, do you draw the ability to merge those things from somewhere? Or is it just, again, just this thing you grew up with, and like all of the little bits and pieces throughout your life have built this ability to tell a story with all of these great factors that can draw multiple different types of audience members in?
I mean, I that for sure that's part of it is all those bits and pieces and but reading wonderful authors who do that and screenwriters and all the storytelling I've consumed and there's so much of it. But also just working very hard on my craft, like I didn't when I started my screenwriting career, I was probably a really crappy writer. You know, like I think about some of those early script and I go, oh God, let's just not ever say what my real name is and have nobody track those down. Um, so, a lot of it has been working very hard to have those things happen.
Okay. Tell us about how you go about developing your characters, and the process in doing that. And maybe tell us about some of your secondary or tertiary characters in some of your books that you really like, and particularly in Bedeviled AF and that series. Tell us a little bit about some of those characters.
Okay. I will tell you just I think my favorite secondary character though is not from Bedeviled AF,
Okay.
so I just have to
No,
mention
yeah, yeah.
Tatiana. Tatiana was modeled on Iris Apfel, who unfortunately just passed away. I don't know if people are not familiar with her. She was a fashion icon, and she was a designer, and she was modeling in her 80s, 90s, and up to she passed away at 102, I believe. And she was just this larger than life New York personality. And I just thought she was magnificent. And so when Miri in my Magic After Midlife books has to end up working for this magic fixer, I decided that Tatiana, who was going to be based on Iris, would be that person. So she's this octogenarian, famous artist, but has this side hustle as being a magic fixer. And she's this New York Jew with this cigarette smoking rasp. And I adore her to pieces. So she's probably my favorite secondary character.
That's great.
Um, for so Big Demon Energy. So just to give you all an introduction to what it's about, I wanted to return to demons with Big Demon Energy. I hadn't had demons in any books since Unlikable Demon Hunter. And I started to think about, I really wanted to write a character who was a demon. Now, to me, I don't know if any of your audience has read Deborah Dunbar's Imp series, but to me, that is like just stellar. Like she is a full demon, Sam, and it is amazingly written. So if you want to read a fantastic full demon that is so funny, go read Deborah Dunbar's Imp series. Um, but I wanted to write somebody who was half demon. But because she's 30, it's not like she's having to struggle to come to grips with it. But she's living in a world where vampires have done a fantastic job with PR and people adore vampires. It's just total celebrity worshiping, but demons are reviled and despised. And so she is, and then there were other things that played into it, like developing my magic system, because I always sort of develop the magic system in conjunction with my main heroine. And the magic system I wanted to play with was actually one based on a fire system, a fire magic, but on the Hanukkah miracle specifically, the miracle of light and everything, the ways that fire works. So they illuminate, it cleanses, it burns, it. And so this is the magic system in this world. And so she has illumination magic, which you find gets tied to also her demon side. And she's also a Maccabee, which is again, going back to the Hanukkah heroes, they are the modern day supernatural policing organization. And her dream is to become a top operative at a very young age, at 30, and she thinks it's in the bag because she wants to do such good in the world that when it's time to come out and say, I am half demon, people won't say, well, half demon, any drop of demon blood automatically trumps humanity and you must be evil. So she will be a force for change, a force for good. No one else will ever suffer like she's had to suffer hiding away all this time. And so she thinks this promotion is in the bag, and she gets called into the director's office, who is also her mother and the person who has told her to keep this quiet her entire life. And instead of getting the promotion, she's told she's going to co-lead this series of murders that has happened. One has happened in Vancouver. They've been happening around the world. And a new investigator is showing up, and he has carte blanche, which is unheard of in this very rule-loving organization. And she needs to basically spy on this new investigator for the director, because the director does not like the investigator, and get some dirt and try to get him out as quickly as possible and wrap this case up, and then they'll talk promotion. And it turns out that the investigator is her ex-boyfriend, the only one of the only naturally born vampires in the world, and the only person she's ever told her secret to, the night before he dumped her. And so that's
Wow.
what kicks off this whole thing.
Wow.
And so because there are certain things that are very important to me in my books and that go through all my books, one of them is a strong female friendship. So there's always the best friend is very important to me, and her best friend, Sachi Saito, who is of Japanese Canadian heritage and is very bloodthirsty. And she's actually a human operative who wants to work with the few vampires that are in the Maccabees. So because she likes to kill things and they don't jail rogue vamps. So yeah, so that was fun, like writing this very bloodthirsty best friend who has a very dry wit. Um, yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. And you've got a third, like your second book just came out not too long ago, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yes.
last week, I want to say.
Yep, it did. And then the third book's going to be out on. So I'm now, because I opened my own bookstore online,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things I offer is if you buy it on my bookstore, you get it 3 weeks early. So it'll be out in August on Deborah Wilde Books, but then it goes wide 3 weeks later everywhere else in September.
Oh, great. That's a great little thing for your fans to be able to be like, haha, I got the in.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's
It's my
awesome.
way of saying thank you.
Do you have any other projects in the works coming up that you can talk about?
No, I have a secret project that I'm not allowed to write yet because my brain does not do well writing 2 series at once.
Yeah,
So at the moment, I'm only dumping notes into a giant Word file about it. But it's so shiny and pretty, and
right.
I really want to just write it. But no, I have a
Got to
couple more
finish
books
other
to write
stuff.
in this series, so I can't. Not
Yeah.
allowed to.
Do you ever think about going back to some of the previous series and continuing those again?
Well, I kind of did that with the Jezebel Files because that one was only 4 books. And everybody, like I just kept getting constantly emails. We want more. We want more. We want. It's not enough. 4 books was not enough. My whole thing is I never want to give anyone filler, and I
Yeah.
know that series, it was very tight, but it was very satisfying because it was so tight and then we were out. Um, so I had been thinking for a while, okay, is there a way to return to the world? But my main character's journey is over, and I'm not just going to go back to give you guys more of her as the main character when I have nowhere for her to grow. Like there has to be somewhere for my characters to grow,
Yeah.
or just as a writer I can't write these characters. So actually I came up with, I had wanted to write a Red Riding Hood story for a very long time, and I actually came up with the male lead in this. It's his cousin who's a scientist, and she accidentally creates the world's first werewolf, who is this cop who she ends up having to work with. She calls him Lobo Cop. And so I was able to,
I love it.
I was very proud of myself for that one. I was able to return to the world and return to the fun of the world and give my hardcore readers like sort of an arcing off of the romantic story, but give them a fresh new way into the world. That said, I don't know that I'd do that again
Okay.
because I didn't I'd have to plan it to begin with, because it was how do I make this work with what exists already? And I think for me, I would rather, if I was going to do a spin-off, know how it fits into the world going into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. You have some upcoming events in April. You're going to be in Paris, right? The Editions Bookmark
Yes.
event. That sounds like
Yeah.
fun.
Oh, I'm so excited.
And
Yeah.
then,
So my French publishers are doing a pop-up bookstore and I got
okay,
invited to come do a signing. Yeah.
that's awesome. So that's in April, so you guys can go ahead and check that out. In September, you're going to be in Edinburgh, right?
Yep.
I do not have an
Yes.
accent, so I'm not going to pronounce that anywhere close to the way they do. But and that's for the Rare event, all capital letters.
Yes. Yeah.
R-A-R-E.
And there's going to be a bunch of fantastic urban fantasy authors, including Heather Harris, who was on this podcast.
Heather Harris
She'll be
is
there.
amazing. Love Heather
Yep.
Harris. Well,
Yes, me too.
she's kind of local. She's kind of local.
She's kind of local. And Helen Harper, who is local, will be there as well. So she's another fantastic and very funny urban fantasy author.
That's great. You get to meet all of the other people, all of
Yeah.
them. People can find you on Instagram at Wild Author. They can also find you on TikTok at Deborah Wild Author, as well as on Instagram at Deborah Wild Author as well. Did I get all those? Did I get them all right?
Yeah, and Facebook.
And Facebook.
Probably Deborah Wild Author.
Awesome. There we go. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
And it's been a blast so far. Of course, anybody that's in the live stream, stick around. We're going to be answering some of your live stream questions, and there are actually quite a few. So we'll get going on those as soon as we talk about some of our upcoming guests. Of course, the weekend after WrestleMania, if you're a big wrestling fan, we're going to be joined on April 8th by former Ring of Honor Tag Team Champion, but he's also the co-host of one of the most well-known paranormal podcasts out there, Darkness Radio. The Beer City Bruiser, aka Matt Winchester, is going to be joining us on April 8th. So that podcast will be available on the 9th. And also later, we're going to be joined by the legendary D&D author Ed Greenwood. He's one of my favorite people in the industry. He's going to be returning to talk about some of his current projects, as well as covering some of the stuff that's happened in the past. We've had movies that's come out. We've had new gaming editions that have come out. He's released a bunch of stuff. So we're going to talk to him and catch up with him as well. So please follow, subscribe, rate, review. It really helps us and all of our amazing guests. So for Deborah Wilde, I am Nick, and thank you for listening to Epic Realms.